All right, we are back again. I think we fixed our feedback loop. I am with Paul Comben. And Paul, just before I go into intros, if you want to kind of say hi a little bit, and we'll see how our sound is here.
Yes, hello. It's just lovely to do this kind of thing. And well, I've worked in the hobby for quite a long while on and off, and this is just another chance, another opportunity to do something really interesting.
Love it. Pleasure to have you here. Our audio is crystal clear, so I'll give you a proper introduction. Paul Comben is an author, historian. We're going to talk about your brand new book, A Dicey Business. So that's one thing we'll be doing. We're going to spend, you had some great topic ideas, which I'm going to kind of let you unfurl as we go, but we're going to also focus on wargame design and the science and art of that. And you stunned me with your painting acumen as well. You had some beautiful, I think you sent me 4 different paintings, and I want to ask you, or just some digital painting examples of your work, and I wanted to ask you kind of some things on that as we move through this.
Yeah, sure.
We're also going to talk about a little bit how we met via LinkedIn, and your work with Vinto Nuovo. Do I say that right? My Spanish is not as good as my wife always tells me.
It's Italian.
Italian? See, that's
it's Italian. Vinto Nuovo.
That's the American coming through. I apologize, Paul.
No problems.
We'll talk about some of the game work there as well, and then we'll move through some particular topics that you kind of have that we'll just kind of meander along, and we'll let you bring those up as you go. So welcome to Bonding with Board Games, and I'll give it to you for a little bit.
Okay, well, just to introduce myself, I was born in London and grew up in the East End of London. I was born in 1960, and the area I lived in London was a poor area. It was still suffering from all the effects of the Blitz a few years earlier. And the little road I lived in was full of houses that had either been hastily rebuilt, or there were large gaps between houses. And looking back on it now, it was really a little bit of history on my doorstep. It was the first introduction to something that was very relevant and not that long ago. Of course, as a child, you always think that everything in the past is ancient. But, my parents had stayed in London during the Blitz. They'd not been evacuated, never did find out why. And so listening to them and then hearing more about the service record of my ancestors, that was the first introduction I had to history, and especially to military history.
Right. First of all, you've intrigued me. I'm with you. I love history. We even talked once, and I know it's not Hadrian's Wall, but you have some old historic sites that date back to, I believe, Roman times, even not very far away from where you live.
Well, the nearest Roman site is a fort called Hardknott, which is up in the higher part of the Lake District, which was part of the coastal sea defences that we're only about 70 miles south of Hadrian's Wall. But the wall had kind of, if you like, dangly bits, because either side of it, along the two coasts, which are quite close together, the east and west coast of England at this point, obviously you had to watch out for incursions and raids. So the Romans built these towers and fort positions along parts of the Lake District. A place called Maryport has a very substantial Roman museum with a lot of the stuff drawn from locally, and the same on the North Sea coast as well. I first went to Hadrian's Wall when I was 17 back in 1977, which is a hideously long time ago now.
That's just like yesterday. What are you talking about? It's yesterday.
Yeah, well, I'll try and fool myself about that, but certain people I know disagree.
I agree. I know. I remember as a kid, everybody, oh, you were born. I was born in 1970, and they'd be like, oh, 70, and now it'll come up. I'm born in 1970, and the young kids, even that I work with now, are like, I don't even think you had cell phones back then. I go, oh, we most definitely did not have cell phones.
No, life. I mean, this is the other side of what I was thinking about in terms of the 60s and the Blitz. At the same time as I was living with the consequences of recent bygone history, or very recent history, I was also living at a time in London when there was history about to happen, because, you know, there was a certain social element and culture and fashion and music that went on in the 60s, which I was far too young to experience in its full extent.
Sure.
Which was one of the living regrets of my life. But, you know, I had my eyes open and my ears open to the music and the fashion of those times. And, you know, England winning the World Cup in '66, it all meant a lot to me. And it sat in my mind as, I suppose, subconsciously, it was going to become the inspiration for a lot of my painting later on.
Beautiful. Now, we definitely want to touch on a Dicey Business. Do you want to start with that, your book, or do we want to talk about how you kind of got into doing some translation work for different companies over in Europe?
Well, the book itself, if we'll do the book first. The book came about because I felt I wanted to contribute something direct to the hobby, and I've had a lot of success with shorter articles in websites and whatnot, and people have enjoyed the humor by and large, but there was a lot more I could do if I had a lot more space. So obviously I went to a book format. The book starts in 1972, and at that point I was just 12, and I went to a big toy store in London and found myself absolutely amazingly confronted by this massive wall of war games for the first time. Sure. And of course, at that age, you are, how can you put it? You've more or less grown out of the time of playing soldiers, running around the playground, you know. But I suppose just as that period was coming to an end for me, I was confronted with this wall of war games, you know, the Jutlands and Africa Corps, all Avalon Hill stuff. Yeah. And the only snag was at that point that I didn't have the money to buy any of them. £5 they were in England at that time.
Yep.
And I was in the shop with £1.50, so I was a bit stuck.
Now, I know you mentioned that 1914, I believe, was one of your first games in Gettysburg, both from Avalon Hill.
Yes, well, what a contrast in design advanced techniques that was, because obviously, the Gettysburg was a very, very basic game. Even by the 60 standards, it was pretty basic. 1914 was very ambitious, and it was a game that, although I don't think it was that successful, it nevertheless marked an ambition to be more detailed and more thorough, and looking at the process of putting a simulation together compared to what had gone before. And of course, the story I have with 1914 was that on the day I got it, Christmas Day 1972, it was a big family get-together, as Christmases are, and my grandfather was in the room, and he, of course, had been a sergeant in the BEF of 1914. And as soon as he saw this, he clued in on it. And there was no kind of, well, what you're doing with a game about that, or, you know, kind of horror about having what looked like a toy, maybe to some people.
Right.
He sat down, he looked at the map, he took me all through the places he'd been, and he was absolutely intrigued, and it was a lovely, lovely time with him.
Wow. Yeah, that's magical. That's unbelievable.
Yeah. He served until 1916, and then he was very badly wounded. And that was the end of his service career, because he was a professional soldier. And I think probably he had that bearing of a professional soldier, that he'd seen a lot of awful things, but his reaction to it wasn't quite the same as someone who would be enlisted, conscripted later on. And then he died in 1977.
Wow. And I totally understand what you're saying. And when I was 22, no combat, but I was a medic in a light infantry unit, and I can picture exactly what you're saying. A professional soldier who's been in for some time versus someone conscripted in with a double shock, really, of not only being in military life, but then into action. Now, that is intriguing, because the very first game I purchased, 1983, was B-17 Queen of the Skies, the solitaire game from Avalon Hill. And I had, for whatever reason, World War II just spoke to me. I was 13. there was a big game store and a big mall shopping area down in Denver. I lived up in the mountains, but I think I'd probably like window shopped 3 or 4 times without buying anything. It was $15 for me to buy this game, which was similar. I didn't have that. I had to save up for it as well. And I remember thinking, boy, I don't even know if this is going to be good. I like reading about this, but am I going to want to play this? And I had the manual out, which really in today's manuals was probably only, I don't know, 15 pages, not anything that's massive. But my dad, who he's passed, he was a Lutheran minister. And he said, what do you got there? What are you doing? And I said, oh, these are rules to a game. And he said, well, let me see that. And he was astounded that rules would be more like this booklet, the way the Avalon Hills or war game rules are broken down, 1.6.05. And he kept saying, this is a game? And I said, yeah. And I really, I want to get it right so that I can play it and see if it kind of matches up with what I've been reading. And we'll talk a little later because you have a great side topic about the relationship between details in games versus the narrative effect of wargaming, and how that kind of some games are very detailed, but they then don't even play out what the reality was. And that's, I don't know if you want to segue into that now or if you want to bring some of that up later, but when you brought up that as a side topic, I knew exactly what you were talking about.
Yeah. B-17 is a game that I do mention in the book. It's one of those games which it was meant to be what you might call an air combat sim. You're flying a fort or crewing a fort going over Germany or northwestern Europe. But I think we all recognized pretty soon as we started playing it that although flying B-17s over Germany in the Second World War was a very dangerous thing to do, it wasn't quite as dangerous as the game made out. I think that the line I put in the book was, can you complete 25 missions a game challenge? Well, you could do if you had 25 planes. Yeah, 25 planes, about 250 different crew members.
Yes.
And but the thing with it was, it's a very interesting game because when you look at it, you remember it, it's got no story actually in it at all, not written down. You just get roster sheets, you get damage sheets, you get the damage tables, you move your little plane further and further towards the target, but there's no narrative story, except everything about that game invited you to create your own story, which is one way of doing it. Now, whether the designers meant to do that or whether it was something that just came along because that's how people envisaged handling the game, it's obviously going to be for different players to answer.
100%. And I'm gonna comment on that, but I want to let Eric Burden know he's got a question, good question. I'm going to come back to it in a second, Eric. So I'm not ignoring your question. We'll get to it. I felt so lucky that B-17 Queen of the Skies ended up being my first game because the style of game, first of all, you're exactly right. It's much more of almost like it's almost a comic book or a movie type experience of what a B-17 was. And I learned, actually, it was amazing to me that as I played and I really got deep into it, of course, I'm putting my buddies' names in the different parts of the plane and I'm putting myself in there. So it had that whole kind of role-playing aspect, but it was the first time that I had, as a player of a game and a knower of that B-17 kind of what they were doing, that I was able to kind of see, even in a weird way, some of the heroics and tragedies of war in and of itself. And that sounds odd, but as a 13-year-old, there were times that I had a deeper understanding of even kind of what the tragedy of war was, even though I knew this was a fictionalized, kind of like a good movie can place you somewhere, even though that movie's not the reality.
Yeah. It was a game that invited personalized experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And at 13, it kind of advanced me to almost a more mature way of thinking about loss and what the World War II veterans or what the guys in the planes had to face, knowing that that wasn't all of them, but that was definitely most 100% some of them. And even the suddenness, you know, you get a flame hit in your fuel tank, you're burning, and that's it. Or the bombs are struck and it's over. And even the finality of the game and it was done, you know, and you might have even had game time. You had time invested and you were doing great and it was a struggle. And then one roll, one chart check and done. And I remember even I was so into one game and that happened. And I literally had to take a break from the game because I was like, wow. I mean, there was a visceral emotional reaction to some parts of the game. And that was when I realized, wow, this is an interesting hobby. I've had books move me, movies touch me, but that was the first time a game had done something in that artistic sense.
Yeah, I think also one of the things that you raise there is interesting from the point of view of how games process a game experience, because you spoke about this sudden, something's hit and you're finished, you're gone. And this is an aspect of game detail that I can't say it bothers me, but it interests me, because I mean, I've seen you recently work through the components of MBT, which is an incredibly detailed look. And there's nothing wrong with games being incredibly detailed. But if you're in a tank or you're in a plane, all of this physics about ballistics and where have you been hit and what's happened, none of that really applies to the experience. You've either been hit or you haven't been hit. You've either got to get out or you're still okay. And one of the things, again, I say in the book quite early on, is that I learned through my own inclination that what I preferred in games was those narrative effects rather than an immense amount of detail. And as I will go on in a minute to talk about where I think detail can sometimes put you in the wrong direction.
Yes. And when you mentioned that as a topic, I was like, this is kismet, because that's exactly, I mean, you really put your thumb on it when you even explained just the idea of the topic. So I agree 100%. And please continue, because that is where I found I'm not as much a fan of a sim as I am of the experiential game that gives me the feeling of being there.
Okay. Well, the example I would give, it's one of the battles I would claim to know quite a lot about, is Waterloo. Now, it's reckoned that by the evening of Waterloo, just before the final French Imperial Guard attack, the final crisis of the battle, that Wellington was down to probably about 30,000 men who were still capable of offering resistance and viable within viable formations. And that means that 40,000 men are missing. Now, to come straight to the point with this, if you were to wipe out 40,000 men by step loss reductions or marking crosses on roster sheets from just about any decent Waterloo game I know, that army is going to melt away. And it's not going to stand the way it stood at 7 o'clock in the evening. So it led me to think, well, what's going wrong with this process? And one of the ways I would highlight this was early on in the battle, there was this massive French assault on Wellington's left. And there were two British brigades that were part of Picton's division that were basically the main units in the way of it, at least initially. Now, both of those units had suffered badly at a battle called Quatre Bras a couple of days earlier, but they'd recovered to the extent that their morale was okay, but obviously they were reduced in strength. Well, in comes these 16,000 French infantry, and they're piling in, and these two British brigades begin to break. The last word spoken by their divisional commander, who was a chap called Thomas Picton, was rally the Highlanders because they were breaking. And then when the cavalry was sent in, the word to the Union Brigade of Cavalry was, everything's giving way in front of you, you've got to go in. And well, obviously the attack was eventually repulsed, but it was, as Wellington would say later, a very near-run thing. But the irony is that if you go ahead 5 hours after that initial French afternoon attack, those brigades are even more reduced now. They've had 5 hours of skirmishers popping at them, and they've had artillery shells flying at them for 5 more hours, and they've had some, although the French cavalry charges were a bit more elsewhere, they did have some effect on the units left, on Wellington's left of his line. So they've had all of that. They've been pushed back. And yet at 7 o'clock, they were less likely to break than at 2. Now, one of the ways I sort of posited you could work a way around this is you forget about step losses. You forget about morale drops. What you do is you have an A side of a unit and a B side. The unit can only be destroyed once it's on its B side, but it can be returned to its A side. Because people usually think that if a unit is losing men, you've got to mark it down. You've got to put it in a state where it's not as strong as it was. And I'm not convinced in every circumstance that that's necessary. And the support for that I would give, a game that you may have played, you remember Turning Point Stalingrad?
Yes.
Yes. Well, in that one, there was an article written by Don Greenwood in 1989 in the General, where he spoke about the way in which the shape of the game would go, that you would end up with a great pile of dead Soviet units usually, and very few eliminated German ones. So he'd say, well, what's happening to the German units? They're being wound down, they're being reduced, but they're not losing their cohesion in terms of being able to put in a fight. So losses are abstracted at a higher level.
Right.
Yeah, it is, this thing about, let's have a look at what I put here. It is this, I think really it is this issue when losses compel something to happen that historically wouldn't necessarily happen. Some games do cater for losses in a way that can have semi-positive effects, such as the Bloodlust rules, the old Gamer series, the Brigade series.
Okay.
They had a Bloodlust rule where if you took losses, your morale could actually shoot up in some respects, simply because that's the funny kind of psychology that works in a battlefield.
And that's where you talk specifically about that a designer may run across a gaming model that all of a sudden it's not jiving or really linking with history. And I know your point was kind of like a designer needs to really look at that. If what they've done seems like it would work, but it's not actually something that is connecting with the actual history. Am I right with that interpretation?
Yes, you are. The other example I give, and this of course brings things rather closer to home for me, is Battle of Hastings. Now, on the quiet over the years, there have been quite a number of Battle of Hastings games. The one thing that they've all had in common, and I'm not going to mean this as a carving criticism, it's just a reality, is that they've all put the battle on the wrong battlefield. That's not always been the designer's fault, because the big push in kind of historical accounts and heritage in this country is that the battle was fought just south of the town of Battle on a place called Senlac Hill. But the argument I make is one of the things that wargaming can do as a means of analysis, because what a war game is, it's a model to make historical events run. It's a model which looks at why things did happen, what could have happened, what the permutations were. So there should be something in a wargaming model that should suggest that the way history has been presented is incorrect. Now, the problems you get with Hastings games is you have this artificial protection of the Saxon army's flanks by bringing the map edges in. Every game does it. Because if you actually had a bigger battlefield, a bigger map, the Normans would do what they would have done if the battle had been there, which is ride round both sides of his army and encircle him. But it didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen was because the battle was not fought on that battlefield. It was fought, and the evidence is growing, a few miles away at a place called Crowhurst, which is much nearer where it's now believed the Norman landing site was. And it was a position where King Harold could bottle in the Norman army because he had wetlands to either side of him. And this is a point. This is where it links with Waterloo in a funny kind of way. One of the major features of the Battle of Hastings was this massive ditch called the Malfoss. And at the end of the battle, you know, the Saxon army, what's left of it, is running off, and the Norman knights are in pursuit. And a lot of them fell in this whopping great big ditch, 60 feet deep, and they reckon dozens or scores were killed. The problem is there is no Malfoss at Senlac Hill. Absolutely nothing. But at Crowhurst, there is a very long ditch. It goes up to 60 feet deep. You can't see it because it's surrounded by ancient woodland, but it's there. And to insist, if people still want to insist that Senlac Hill was the site of the battle, it's like going to Waterloo. If you were to visit Waterloo, or what you were told was the Waterloo battlefield, and you've read some books, you know that there was this big fight at Hougoumont, the chateau, and it was defended all day by the British Guards and so on. And when you get to this supposed Waterloo battle site, there's no chateau, there's no outline, there's no foundation, there's no record that anyone ever built a chateau there, but you're still told it's a battlefield. It doesn't pan out. I mean, the other things I could say about Hastings in terms of historical modelling is it's simple stuff. It's staring people in the face. Saxon housecarls are the main half troops, the king's own men. They were armed with these massive two-handed axes with a shaft about 4 foot long. Well, you can't man a shield wall and wield an axe that size. In addition to which, if you've got two axes or a line of axemen all armed like that, they're going to need about 10 foot of clearance either side of them. Otherwise, they're going to start chopping bits off each other. What they reckon now, the people who are chronicling this and doing the research, is that Harold had built a palisade in front of his army, and maybe more than one, with a ditch, because he had an army. He was an experienced military commander, and he had an army that had never faced cavalry before, mounted knights. And he needed to do more in order to give them a chance than simply say, everyone stand very tight together on this picnic slope and we'll hope for the best. Okay.
Understood. Let me bring up Eric Burden has a comment here. It came in early, so it was before we got into some of these topics, but he says his question is preferred time period to study and read about. Any areas of history that you feel are neglected as fields of study?
Well, preferred areas are the naval aspects of the First World War and the Napoleonic era. Those are really my two main areas. Areas that have been seriously neglected, we're still not seeing very much at all by way of decent simulations of those major attritional battles of the First World War. There are a few, but off the top of my head, I can only think of one, with due respect to anyone else who actually has produced one and I've forgotten about it, but only one major design on the Battle of the Somme. And the only thing I can think of on Passchendaele is the last component part of John Kolkowski's first Red Poppies campaigns game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes people shy away from doing that kind of stuff because they think it'll be boring. Well, it depends on how you do it.
Right.
You know, and I think designers have more latitude these days in how they can approach subjects compared to in years gone by.
Now, kind of shifting a little bit, have you ever seen any of the ham tag? You've probably seen a few of my ham tag shows where I have the panel.
Yes.
All right. We have, Greg Schmidtkins always sits to my left, and he's our grognard, our, very intelligent and deep thinker and well-read and a skilled even technical writing in his engineering life. And he, I think, is really, really deep and rich and loves heavy games. He likes playing light games as well, but he really loves these heavier, even strategic and operational level games. Judd, who always sits to my right, also engineer, but he gets into, I don't want to paraphrase, but he gets into everything, anything but Euro kind of generally. All right. But I would then call myself, he likes Ameritrash type games too, a lot of dudes on a map. And I end up being the guy in the middle that's the simplest, basic gamer. I like a lot of tactical stuff. And I think it's because of the narrative and placing myself in the scene rather than as the general above or over. And simulations, I tend to steer away from. And I think some of it goes back to our prior discussion about even how my entry came into games, but also what I tend to pull out of games. Now, would you consider yourself more of that? You like a good simulation, but you want one that actually simulates kind of the feeling as well, not just the like main MBT. You're exactly right. It's, it's slope and thickness of armor and it's less of the feeling and more of, the crunchy numbers of it. Where do you sit?
Well, I believe you can actually have a good simulation without necessarily having half a ton of rules. It depends how the designer relates to the subject and what the designer wants to present. And again, if I bring this back to a kind of art way of doing things, one of the best known of Van Gogh's paintings, this is not me going off at a tangent, it will be relevant in a minute.
Go.
Well, he did a painting towards the end of his life, last few months of his life, of the church at Auvers. It looks like a cathedral, but it's only because of the way he painted it. But of course, this building in real life would have had all kinds of entablatures and cornices and gargoyles and this and that on it. But he left all that out, or very nearly all of it out, because of the way in which he wanted to prioritize what he wanted to see in the subject. And that meant that he had one view of how to present an attractive, interesting picture. But at the same time, you could put another artist in front of the same building, the same structure, and get a completely different, more detailed picture. It's a difference between, in art terms, we'll come off the art bit in a minute, someone like Constable, who has a bit of a reputation for wanting to put all the leaves on the trees in his landscapes, and someone like a Monet, who would get a couple of bits of green on the end of a thick brush and go, and there's your tree.
Yes.
You know it's a tree, there's leaves on it. We'll go on and looking at something else now because the sun's out. And this is a thing with a key aspect of design. A designer can go into this, I want to put everything in, or as much as I can. It's always dangerous because a system can only carry so much, and sometimes figuratively things can fall out of the box.
Sure.
The two other approaches where you start leaving things out are either that a designer will look and say, I think that these are the salient aspects of this campaign, and therefore that's what I concentrate on, and everything else will either be subordinated or you ain't going to find it at all. Or they can go for the line, I'm really interested in command and control, or I'm really interested in the way in which artillery dominated this particular engagement. That's what I concentrate on, and everything else gets subordinated or it just isn't there. And I mean, sometimes, I know that your friend Judd said in a recent broadcast that he found that the Band of Brothers series gave him everything he wanted at a tactical level. Well, I'd agree with that, because I play Band of Brothers. I did try and play Advanced Squad Leader. Yes, that's another chapter in the book. What a happy time that was. No, it wasn't. 80-mile round trip to London. I get back to my home in Tunbridge Wells, and I've got it all home now. I bought about 500 quid's worth of stuff. I open up the rules folder, one of the bloody pages is missing. I was delighted. It was a hot day. It was a hot day. The cat jumped in the flipping bag before I could get the things out of it. And yeah, that was it. I mean, it was one of those classic moments. I had to go all the way back up to London the following day, pick me Page up and come back. So that was my experience as squad leader after a very, very bad start. But anyway, from the serious point of view, it's, you know, you've got Band of Brothers, you've got Advanced Squad Leader. What are you really not getting in Band of Brothers that you feel that you absolutely got to have, and therefore you go to Advanced Squad Leader? It's personal choice. Sure. It is personal choice. But, you know, I sometimes think, well, I'm banging on towards 60 now, and I don't know how many more 60-page rule books I can cope with.
Yes. 100%. I find, you know, I've got a young family currently, and even my professional life, my home life, and then my gaming life, I'll be working through a rule set, and I really, really desire the simplicity of being able to dive in quickly, and then and this is hard to do for a designer. I get it, but I almost want to experience the game as I learn the game. And I'm one of the ones that will read and teach. So I have friends that have that, and their main deal is, oh, I'll hang out with so-and-so, and then I don't have to learn it. I'll just get it taught to me. It's easier that way. And I understand that as well. I understand that frame. It's one thing I like about a lot of the kind of the explosion of YouTube teaching. There's some phenomenal game teachers out there, and sometimes I'll play with a much younger person, and they're like, why are you reading the rules? Just go look on YouTube. And so there's some neat aspects to that as well. But yeah, you know, I mean, you know, I love Conflict of Heroes a lot of times, just because even the rule set that Academy Games at UVA put out was, hey, we're just going to teach you this and this and this, and now you can play the first scenario, and then we're going to teach you, you know, group movement or artillery, and now you can play this scenario. And it made the whole thing just so much more approachable and friendly that it became a system that I enjoyed, even for the way it was presented in learning. Yeah.
I mean, I tend to the opinion, I mean, I'm a big fan. Well, I love the games that I've worked with, and, you know, I like the approach that Emanuele has over in Italy. I Skyped with him about 2 years ago, and he asked me what my opinion was of his two diceless games, which are Waterloo 200 and 1914 Germany at War. Now, I love both of them. I mean, the rule sets aren't that long. And I said, well, I think they're very good. I really enjoyed them. And he said, well, yes, they're fine. He said, but I think they're too complex. He said, they're not really, I think he's been feeling towards this notion that he can produce games that give authentic experiences but have a modicum of rules. You can learn them in an hour, and as you saw with Bloody Monday, you know, you can play that in an hour or so and then be ready to set it up and play it the other way around.
Right.
And I think that's important to give people those kind of options in the hobby, because, you know, I haven't got space to have games set up for 2 weeks.
Yes.
And I haven't got the inclination, usually, unless it's a subject I'm vastly passionate about, to spend a long time on rule sets anymore.
Yes, that's exactly where I've gone. And if a designer is able to give me the experiential level without the filtering of massive amounts of rules, that almost breaks me out of that gaming experience. You know, it puts me back into the real world of ink and paper. You know, until I've mastered it, I'm with you. I just don't have the time or the patience for it. Yeah,
I mean, I put I think it's in an article that's lodged with War Diary, and I've got this article with the editor there that it looks at Advanced Squad Leader, and I've seen it happen with YouTube. I mean, you can't help sometimes just taking a little bit of the mickey out of the way some YouTube films go. And some people do advanced squad leader, and sooner or later you get to the point, well, I've made a mistake here, you know. I forgot to see if the duck pond's on fire, you know, or something like that. You know, there's so many little things, and you think, well, it's like going to a lovely work of art and then kind of peering at one tiny little portion of it. Well, some people love it, you know, if it's what they want, fine, but it's just not for me anymore.
Yes. Now you pointed out, I wanted to mention too, you do write for not only War Diary magazine, but the Board Gaming Life and also the Board Gaming Way, which are websites.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I do. Yeah, I've been writing for both of the websites for about 5 or 6 years. That started with me. I was on Consim World for a while, and I got to know a chap called Herman Luckman, who's designed all kinds of interesting games over the last few years. And then, having got friendly with him, I got friendly with some of his friends, and his friends include the gentlemen who run both of those websites. And that's how I started writing for them. In an indirect way, one of the inspirations for the book, again, was it was a humorous piece I'd put on the Board Wargaming Life called Gettysburgs, which, if you've not seen it, I'm advertising my own work here. But anyway.
Oh, that's what you should be doing, and I haven't seen it. Tell me more.
Well, it was a look at all the different Gettysburg games that I've played over the years, including some absolute humdingers and some that were more ding than hum. But anyway, what I did, and this was the first time I used them, and I don't know where the idea came from, I kept doing these little episodes of Robert E. Lee and Walter Taylor, mercilessly taken from the film, having conversations about the games or things that were linked to particular situations represented in game form. And people thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, I love it.
And I couldn't resist using them again. So at times in the book, you do get Major Taylor and Robert E. Lee talking about games in a rather distracted way. I mean, one of the big questions I ask is, what did happen to Robert E. Lee's thinking processes any time he left and went north of the Mason-Dixon line? Because he just seemed to be a completely different commander the moment he got up there. He lost control of himself. Yeah, so there's a lot of humor in it.
Yes, and I love that, and I think that needs to be in there as well. I mean, it's part of a well-rounded hobby. Now, in the background, I can see some of your work because you've shared some digital images of your work, and I'm curious on a couple of things. When you gave me a little bit of notes that it was in 1990 when you started to get involved in art. So one, what even draws you in, you know, at that time period? And then if you can even, or if you choose to, if you wanted to share, you know, some of the art that you even shared with me. The approach to, and I'll say it wrong, Agincourt was beautiful. I love that picture, that painting.
Yeah, that's a relatively early one. Why did I start? Oh, I started for very odd reasons. It was just before I and my wife got married. And she at the time was working for a charity organization that worked with people who had hearing impairment. And she had been donated a large amount of very large quality paper and some paints. And she said, there's a really chance that you could do some posters for the window of the office. And I did. And I've got a bit of a knack with words. So she wanted some posters about tinnitus, you know, which can be self-inflicted ear damage. And I had this picture. I did a picture of a young lad with his earphones on and his music blaring. And the little slogan with it was, some earrings cannot be removed. and stuff like which she loved. But of course, by the time I'd finished all that, there was still a lot of paint left. So I started painting these pictures. And the very first picture I ever painted, I'd written a book, which I've actually finally managed to get out on Amazon, called The Book of British Wizards. And I did this picture of a little wizard walking through some woodland with an owl looking at him, wondering what on earth he was up to. And that was my very first picture. And I'm completely self-taught as an artist.
I was going to ask you too, because yeah, I was thinking, well, I have no artistic ability at all. My son laughs when I try. Like if we play Pictionary or something, he's like, "What is that?" So you're self-taught. That brings you into it, and then it was just another way for you to kind of have a release, or you found you enjoyed the piece of creating.
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much because I've had some issues in my life. I was lately diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, so I had a lot of problems, but no real title to give to them. But like a lot of Asperger's people, you do have talents and things that you can fix an interest on. It took me a while to get any proficiency with painting, but somehow I had the faith that I'd always eventually be pretty good at it. And it's become a major sense of worth and value in my life. It's led me around the country and given me, a sense of being able to contact people very much in a way that people will be interested in what I've got to present. Beautiful.
Wonderful. I know we can see some of your work in the background.
Yes.
Did you have anything else you wanted to show? I don't think I can get it up on my phone that would do it any justice.
Okay. Let's see if I can do it this way. Can you bear with me a mo?
Sure. And I'll give you a second here, and I'll mute my mic when you get your.
That's okay. We won't be long.
Oh, you're good.
Right. Let's go right at the top. Okay. Let's show you that one. So that's a view of the English Fenlands. Let's bring it back a bit. There we are. So that's an area in East Anglia.
Very nice. Very nice.
Can I show you? Oh, this is. Did I show you that one? You don't remember that one? I've lost your mic.
Sorry, I muted. So if I talk while you're showing it, it'll cut out. No, I haven't seen that one.
No, well, that's a homage to my illustrious ancestor. There's a famous Turner painting, Rain, Steam and Speed, of a train hurtling over a bridge. Well, the bridge it's hurtling over was built by my great uncle, who is Brunel. Now, this is a personal one. This is my mum taking myself and my brother to the fair in London around about 1967.
Wonderful.
And then I'll show you my wife's favourite one, because I think it's her favourite. Well, I don't get it wrong anyway. There we are. And that's the local view where I live now. That's the lake called Ullswater.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
That is your view?
That's a view where it's a lake. Ullswater is about 30 miles from where we live, so we occasionally take a little drive up there.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that is awesome. I'm not kidding. I have zero. My 11-year-old son rightfully mocks any type of drawings I ever do.
Yeah. Well, I must admit, when I was at school, I mean, I had no artistic talent at all. I mean, I used to sit. I mean, we had to do art lessons. I went to a very posh school. I did. I mean, I grew up in a really poor area, but the school was very posh. It was founded in 1681, you see, and there were certain subjects you did because they made the timetable up, and art was one of them.
Huh.
but I wasn't any good at it at school. I mean, as I say, I got to a point, once I got my wargaming friends and my Dungeons and Dragons friends together, I'm afraid I started to lose interest. And there was the incident when I cleared off altogether when I was just short of my 17th birthday. I had a rotten cold. I put this in the book, and I went, I said to the teacher, I'm going home, I don't feel well. And I walked out of the school, and by some strange coincidence, I had all my Saturday job money in my pocket. And I headed up to my war game shop in a place called Finchley, which is right up on the northern edge of London. And I bought myself a copy of Wellington's Victory. And I came all the way back on the underground train, got back off at the station I'd left on. And one of my teachers was standing on the platform. And he was a lovely little chap, but he was known as a soft touch, you see, because if you didn't want to do anything with him, all you used to do was start changing the conversation around to hi-fi systems, and he was gone. He was very easily distracted. And he said to me, "Oh, where have you been, Paul?" I said, "I've been up my war game shop in Finchley." And he looked at me and he smiled. He said, no. He said, "You've been to a museum for a lecture, haven't you?" I mean, that was ridiculous. I had the bag in my hand, you know. But anyway.
I love it.
Yeah.
We've got a commenter here, Joe Bezer fan. He says, "Thanks, guys. Great stuff." So he's enjoying it as well. And I got to admit, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Now, let's see. I think we've hit, but there might be one other. Let me look over some of our things here. You know, I think we've really hit on this on our topics, and this has been pleasant. Is there? What are you currently playing? What have you been for your own enjoyment playing lately?
Right. Well, I do tend to find that an awful lot of what I do play ends up being work for reviews. And one of the games that I really enjoyed playing, well, about this time last year, which is a funny way to go back, but I thought it was a game that captured a lot of what I enjoy in the hobby in terms of simple rules, but effective design. That was a game called Red vs. Reverse, which was on the Battle of Colenso. It was a Boer War game by Legion. And then much more recently, the next thing I'm set up to play is Hood's Last Gamble, which is a Hollandspiel game. I've just finished playing a game for review. It's a lovely game, actually, called Napoleon 1806, which is by a French company, or they've got, I think they've got a link to an American company as well, called Golden Bell. But it's the first in what I think is going to be a series of campaign games. Very simple rules. A lot of the kind of simulation work is done by card events and random draw cards, but it's all been very cleverly worked out, and I was very impressed with that. When I finally get round to playing stuff, particularly for myself, I think the next thing will probably be I've got a feeling it will probably be something Napoleonic. I never stay away from that. Probably the one that I'm really, because my wife is due to have a little bit of time away soon.
Okay.
She's had enough of me. Well, no, we're not putting quite those terms. But she's going into a place where she'll be looked after for a few weeks. Okay. And while she's away, I think the game that's most likely to get set up is Fallen Eagles, which is what surprise! It's a Waterloo game, but it's been sitting burning hole in my shelf for the last few months, so I'm desperate to get it set up.
Now, you also intrigued me. So early on in your young years, you were playing role-playing games with Dungeons and Dragons, and I know you're doing a lot of wargame stuff. Do you ever play other Euros, or do you get into? Are there any other styles of gaming you like outside of wargaming in this age?
Well, one of the things that I did try to play, I keep meaning to get to the Call of Cthulhu card game system, because I have got a friend who's interested in that, and we did try recently playing one of the first scenarios in a game called Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective.
You bet.
Yeah, which we didn't get very far with.
No, was it not working for you, or what was?
No, we didn't make enough notes. I had no idea what was going on. I could have arrested anyone. I could have arrested anyone in the end.
Yeah, my wife and I have that, and I think the next expansion. But my wife, and I was hoping she would want to play it, Liz, and she saw it being played at a convention we were running, and she came over and said, "Didn't you want me to play that with you?" I said, "Yes." She says, "It does not look like a game. They're looking at a newspaper." I said, "Yeah, that is part of it."
That's absolutely. Let's see if my wife is. Oh, she's still there.
Hey.
Yeah. Do you want to come over and say hello? You don't mind, do you, Bart?
Oh, not at all, please.
This is a very, very special lady in my life. Here she comes.
Hello. Hi, how are you?
This lady is a very talented artist. How are you? You can't hear.
I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah, my wife's hearing impaired, but I wanted you to say hello. Okay.
Yeah. Hello. Very nice to meet you.
So you got a winning smile.
Beautiful.
Okay. See you later, sweetheart.
Thank you. Tell her thank you for joining us.
Yeah. I will do. She's a special lady.
You bet. Does she ever game with you at all, or is she not? That gaming isn't her
No,
thing?
I gave up gaming with my wife when we were playing. Well, she's very good at Scrabble. We tried playing backgammon, and I don't know what happens when I play backgammon with people. I seem to be winning, and then I lose. I've got a friend I take a backgammon set to and play occasionally, and I never win there. No. I keep thinking about trying Sherlock Holmes with my wife, but as she likes watching murder mysteries on the television and always has the wrong person convicted, tried, and imprisoned inside the first 5 minutes, I don't think it's a good idea.
Oh, we've got another commenter came in, and this will be good because it's going to be. I'll add some of these things he's requesting. Which let me read this first. D Trammer1 says he got here late, and he's so sorry that if he's missed this, and you haven't, D Trammer. He wants to know, could we get links to Paul's writing or art included in the description? You bet. I will come in and post. I did a little work and set up some stuff in the descriptions. It didn't have the links, and then we had a feedback loop, so we dropped out and came back in again. But Paul, when we are done, you get a chance. Just if you can email me some of those direct links, and I'll cut and paste those right into the description, so people can quickly link to your items as well.
Yeah, sure.
Well, wonderful. I think we've had a great time. I've had a wonderful time.
It's been great, isn't it?
It's been phenomenal. Any questions for me or anything that you're curious about on my end?
Well, just thinking, I must admit, I find I watch a lot of YouTube these days, and I like to sit down and I have my favorite channels. And yeah, I always watch Hamtag, always watch it. And I think you've got a great little setup there. And for pity's sake, it's something that is so important for the future of the hobby, is that you keep this accessibility going and people understand that it's fun, that no one gets too serious about it. So, we've got so many different YouTube reviewers and analysts and whatnot. And one of the last things I put in the book is some people are better at it than others. But I've got a vast amount of admiration for anyone who's got the guts to set up a little bit of recording equipment and give it a go, because it's always appreciated. Always.
Yeah. And my personal life has gotten so busy. It's been hard to even, and this is totally my fault. The guys, Greg and Judd, are always ready to come over. I've got one more that I need to edit, and then we need to film some more. And I need to get some focus on that. And I will tell you personally, I watch other reviewers, and my skill is not, I think, in the realm of actually doing this detailed, spot-on review. It's really, I always tell people, even in my whiskey show that I have, if you like my taste, or if you flat out know that your tastes are not in line with mine. Sometimes people can gather some information even just from knowing, oh, that is what I like, even if Bart or the Chief doesn't like that. And for me, it was part of my ability to immerse in the hobby. As you found out, as I told you, I can't paint my writings, but I can, and I found that was one of my outlets to come in. And having the other guys, flank me worked really well. It was something I actually stole from the Dice Tower from Tom, and when he had Sam and Z on, and I thought, Greg is that hardcore grognard. He's even written an article on ASL in the General that was published. Judd is, the quirky, fun personality where he'll poke at you and then he'll poke at himself, and his deep dives into gaming. And that's where I thought, hey, I'm the light gamer that they can even both poke at me on. And I need to definitely spend some more time there. I mean, part of it is, as it's family first. I do have my full-time job with law enforcement, which sometimes has taken my time and drains me. And then I still want to game, and then I've got to do all my YouTube stuff. So, but it's nice to hear that as well. We had another question come in, or something here. I haven't even read it, from Joe Bezer fan. He says his wife is hearing impaired too. He's been married 22 years. He says, I can't play with her because she struggles with too many rules. So most of his gaming world is solo. And that brings up a great point. I love solo games for two reasons. One, I don't need to get anybody over here. So if I have a period of time, even if it's 15 minutes, I can jump in. Do you do any solo gaming?
I do a vast amount of solo gaming.
Are you doing this primarily with a game that's designed for solitaire, or will you play both sides and just kind of solitaire it in?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really had regular company opponents for a good number of years now. Okay. Also, of course, going back to this review issue again, I find that I need to take a game apart in order to understand what's going on. So when I play games, there is also that job side of it where I'm actually looking at the fundamentals of what's happening. I enjoy it. If I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't do it.
Exactly.
But there's only room here to have one thing set up at once. And in very recent times, it tends to be something I'm going to be writing about. Mm-hmm. Not so long ago, I did a very large article on Kevin Zucker's game, Napoleon's Resurgence. And but that took a long time to write, relatively speaking. I don't like being skimpy on reviews.
Okay.
I like to give a game what it merits, and I like to make the review fun. If I can put a little turn of humor, if it's appropriate, in here and there, I will. And I always make a point, if I am going to say anything where I'm not sure if I like this aspect of the game, I will stress it's only my opinion. Yes.
Now, one other thing I did want to touch on before we go, because you opened me up to some of this war game or gaming itself that's going on in Europe that I wasn't aware of. And a lot of commenters and even emails I get are like, hey, thank you for reviewing some of these games that aren't from the States, that aren't from America. What is, if you feel comfortable, what's the wargaming state in Europe? How is it going? I mean, obviously Spain and Italy we've talked about. What are your feelings on that?
Well, I think I can go back a long way. It's something I remember from many years ago. Someone put a letter into the General, the old Avalon Hill magazine, decades and decades ago, asking for help getting games into Poland at the time when the Iron Curtain was still in existence. So what I'm not going to do is say, well, it's all very recent or relatively recent. There were very notable companies in years gone by. I mean, the embarrassing thing is it doesn't seem to have been anything at all, with one exception I can think of in my country. We've got some great designers.
Right.
You know, Lee Brinnican Wood is an obvious example of that. But British wargame companies, I can think of one in the 1980s. It was a little company called Tactrix. Okay. And they produced some decent games, but that's a long time ago. The French, they had a brilliant company in years gone by called As You Wish. And they did some incredible games. But now I don't know whether it's the combination of electronic media and the fact that we're all closer together, coupled with, what else can I say? Probably there's a certain culture in Europe towards a certain aesthetic, which has made the games, a lot of the games from Europe, stand out that bit more. They don't look like standard war game fare. You know, there are brilliant designs, beautiful looking designs. Avento Nuevo have a very unique look. Trafalgar editions have very much gone their own way. Yes. Companies and designers that are very, very different are important. Though sometimes, again, you've got the issue about, are they so different that it makes it another great big, you know, learning curve to get a grip on what they're doing. I mean, I know that someone who has been a remarkable designer over fairly recent years is Bowen Simmons, who did the Guns of Gettysburg and Napoleon's Triumph and so on. But the games are so radically different to what you would see elsewhere in the hobby. They're not difficult. It's just anytime you're used to zones of control and combat factors and this and that, suddenly getting something which is so radically different, it's a jolt, because I think that we do have our niches and our comfort zones. Yes. I mean, Hexasim, I recently got Great War Commander, which is their most recent title. I mean, it looks absolutely stunning. And there's a lot of great work going on in Europe. And it's very important because, you know, we've got to find some way of keeping the market going and some way of keeping up a clientele. Yeah. Because, I mean, I'm getting older, you know. Yeah. Well, I mean, how many war game years have I got left? Maybe 15. Yeah, then I'll be complaining about our cricket team, wondering why I still haven't seen a World Cup win since 1966. Not that it really bugs me, yes, it does. And you're spot on. You know, I'm seeing in the wider gaming ecosystem, you know, Japan coming in with a lot of their designs. Not really the wargaming world here, although I do know there's some from there as well. But you know, the gaming as a whole, the analog version, where I think people oftentimes want to coalesce back into being with someone and engaging with someone. But you're right. I see the wargaming sphere kind of aging out a little bit. Not to say there aren't young gamers. I'll get emails from guys in their 20s and stuff too that say, "Hey, thank you for doing some of this because I like these type of games." But you know, there was a Board Game Geek thread where people were talking about you know, everything from, now that I'm retired, I thought I would be gaming more, but it turns out I'm busy, or what am I going to do with this huge collection of war games? My kids don't want them. And it's an interesting turn. So I don't know, because I've even had folks get with me that are very anti-war, and I've had some folks that aren't very polite with their engagement, and other ones that are really just concerned, or not concerned, but interested in saying, you know, does this glorify war and death, or what are you doing here? And I've had some great discussions. That's one reason I touched on even B-17 and Ambush, the game system, as a kid, and how it really made war much more real and not a game, or not a movie, or not without loss. And when I share that with some of those folks that are actually engaged in wanting to understand a thought process, I think they even get it. Yeah. Well, I'll leave you with one last thought on that. This is not actually a board war game. It was a computer game that I played some years ago, but it was a serious computer war game, and it made me think. Can't remember what it was called, but it was about the Battle of Britain. And I decided to play it as the Luftwaffe. And I was pounding the RAF, and I was targeting my cities, my homes. And I don't mind admitting that after a certain while, I thought, I can't play this. And I walked away from it. And some people I know would say, well, that'd be silly, it's just a game. But I couldn't. You know, I was that much in it. And you see, it's all very well to say, well, you know, I'm going to put a major raid over Chatham. Well, I know what Chatham looks like.
Right.
You know, and I know what the East End of London looked like at that time. And I know who would have been walking around underneath all that lot when it was coming down.
Right.
And it's not a condemnation of the game. It was just that it was the reality the game was presenting and how I worked with that. So I left that one alone. Not a comment on anyone else's taste on that kind of thing. I mean, sometimes I think there have been certain games that some people have felt a little uneasy about. And it is an interesting subject about taboo subjects for games.
Yeah. We could have a whole nother show, maybe.
Well, we could do, yeah.
And maybe we should, because you're right. We could touch on Academy Games and their game Freedom, which is about the Underground Railroad and slavery. And we'll do that. Let me take one last question.
Yeah, sure.
Came in from Trevor Just. And I haven't read it here yet. Let me take a look. Okay, he says, I've noticed with the advancement of solo play in war games that he says, I play many of mine solo. And Trevor, I would agree. I think both publishers and designers realize that the wargaming crowd in general, a lot of times, a solo game is more accessible. You know, I just did a review of Quartermaster General, their the Peloponnesian War, Victory or Death, I believe. If I missed that, my apologies. But it's designed really for 4. Now it can handle 3 and it can handle 2. But I was very transparent in my final review that I really don't have the time element to get. You know, I have 3 other buddies, but to organize that and to do all that with the family and the shows and the regular job, it's just not as accessible. My son loves playing games, and I can get some other individuals over, and it's just more efficient. But I really don't get that type of gaming in at that level. I just don't have I dream about retirement a little bit on that, and wonder if it will be able to change then. But any final thoughts? Thanks, Trevor. I'm going to let Paul go here, and I can hear my young one starting to jump up and down on the floor. But I love this. So first of all, thank you so much for coming on. I want to plug again, A Dicey Business is your book. Intrigued and great success with that and everything else. Thank you for coming on, and I'll turn the final part of the show over to you for anything you want to add.
Okay, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope that I've whetted people's appetite to think about some of the issues that we've raised today in terms of how designs work and how history can be explored with war games. If you're interested, A Dicey Business, you'll find it on Amazon. You can buy it as a paperback or as an ebook. And it's just been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. It's been lovely.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Hang on the line. I'm going to turn off the live feed, but stay on and we'll chat a little bit in post. Thank you, everybody that's tuned in and all the great questions. And I appreciate you guys very, very much. See you guys.